On February 2nd, 1986, 26-year-old nurse Anita Cobby stepped off a Sydney train, walked past broken payphones, and set off on foot for her parents' home. She was less than 2 kilometers away when a stolen car pulled up alongside her. She never made it through her front door. What happened in a secluded paddock that night wouldn't just trigger Australia's most relentless manhunt, it would shatter a nation's sense of safety forever. The evening had started normally enough. Anita had finished a nursing shift at Sydney Hospital on Macquarie Street, where colleagues knew her as a dedicated and deeply compassionate caregiver. After work, she met a group of fellow nurses for dinner in Redfern. Around 9 p.m., she boarded a train at Central Station to head home to Blacktown in Sydney's west. The train pulled into Blacktown Station shortly before 10 p.m. Her usual routine was simple. Step off the train, head to the public phone booths on the platform, and call her father Gary to drive down and pick her up. But on that warm summer night, the public phones were out of order. Faced with a choice between waiting on an empty platform for an uncertain late bus or walking, Anita decided to walk. It was a familiar route, roughly 3 kilometers along Newton Road toward her parents' house on Enmore Street. It was a warm, clear night in a quiet residential area she had grown up in. Cruising those same streets at that exact moment was a stolen Holden Kingswood sedan. Inside were 5 young men looking for trouble. 18-year-old John Travers, 19-year-old Michael Murdoch, and 3 brothers, Leslie, Michael, and Gary Murphy. They were well known to local police for opportunistic theft, violence, and petty crime. At approximately 10 p.m., as Anita walked along Newton Road, the Holden pulled over. 2 young bystanders watching from down the street saw the passenger door fly open. Before Anita could react, she was grabbed and forcibly pulled into the vehicle. It happened in a matter of seconds.
The witnesses ran to tell nearby adults, but the car had already accelerated into the dark, leaving no time to capture a license plate number or see which direction it turned. Inside the car, a nightmarish ordeal began. The men drove away from the suburban neighborhood, heading toward a semi-industrial rural pocket of Prospect, several kilometers away. Anita was subjected to a continuous, violent assault as Travers drove the vehicle onto a dark dirt stretch off Holbesh Road. They pulled up alongside a secluded farm paddock. Anita was dragged out of the car, forced through a barbed wire fence into the open field, and subjected to a prolonged, brutal attack by all 5 men. Before leaving the scene, Travers used a knife to slash her throat, inflicting fatal injuries to ensure she could not identify them. When midnight passed and Anita hadn't arrived, her parents knew something was wrong. Gary Lynch called the local police to report his daughter missing, and by early Monday morning, a preliminary search was underway. On Tuesday morning, February 4th, 2 days after she vanished, a local farmer named John Kemsley walked out into his Prospect paddock to check on his cattle. Near the perimeter fence, he came across a horrifying scene and immediately alerted authorities. Detectives arrived within minutes, sealing off the area. Task Force MacArthur was formed that afternoon, operating out of the Blacktown Police Station under the direction of Detective Sergeant John Lincoln. The crime scene provided crucial clues. Disturbed soil and blood spatter confirmed that the assault and murder had taken place entirely within the paddock. Near the boundary fence, distinct tire impressions on the gravel shoulder showed where a passenger vehicle had parked briefly before driving off at high speed. Biological evidence was collected, but back in 1986, modern DNA profiling was not available to Australian police forces. The investigation would have to rely on fundamental, relentless detective work, physical evidence, blood grouping, fiber analysis, and public cooperation. The brutality of the crime sent shockwaves across Western Sydney. Public fear quickly turned into widespread anger, prompting the New South Wales state government to post a $50,000 reward for information leading to a conviction.
Within the first week, Task Force MacArthur processed over 1,500 calls from the public. Detectives logged every lead, checked alibis, and combed through criminal records. But for days, they lacked a direct link to a specific vehicle or suspect. The breakthrough came 6 days into the investigation, from an unexpected source inside the local criminal underworld. On February 8th, an informant contacted police with a tip about 18-year-old John Travers. Travers had been seen around Blacktown showing off a large hunting knife and making quiet boasts to acquaintances that he was involved in a high-profile crime that was all over the news. Task Force MacArthur immediately put Travers under heavy, covert surveillance. Rather than arresting him outright for the murder without solid physical proof, detectives waited for an opportunity. On February 20th, they brought him into custody under the pretense of questioning him about unrelated property and vehicle thefts. In the interview room, Travers acted confident, but his statements were full of holes. Under steady questioning, he attempted to talk his way out of trouble, inadvertently dropping specific details about a stolen 1970 Holden sedan, details that only someone connected to the abduction would know. More importantly, his slip-ups gave investigators the names of his regular associates, Michael Murdoch and the three Murphy brothers. Over the next 72 hours, police coordinated a series of synchronized early morning raids across Western Sydney, picking up Murdoch along with Leslie, Michael, and Gary Murphy. With all 5 men in custody, investigators executed a classic divide-and-conquer strategy. The men were placed in separate interrogation rooms at different police stations. Detectives cycled between the rooms, feeding small pieces of information from one suspect to another to break down their alignment. Without a shared story, the group began to fracture. Faced with the reality of a murder charge, individual suspects tried to minimize their own involvement by shifting the blame onto the others. The Murphy brothers claimed Travers had driven the operation and committed the fatal act, while Travers admitted to being present but tried to spread responsibility across the group. In the end, the pressure yielded a full confession. Travers signed a detailed record of interview, admitting to his role in the abduction, sexual assault, and murder, while laying out the exact roles played by Murdoch and the Murphy brothers.
While the interrogations were taking place, forensic teams were working around the clock. Tire impressions taken from the gravel shoulder at Holbeach Road matched the tread patterns on the recovered Holden sedan. Microscopic carpet fibers taken from the victim's clothing were matched directly to the interior flooring of the vehicle. On February 25th, just 23 days after Anita Cobby walked away from Blacktown Station, all 5 men were formally charged with murder, violent sexual assault, and auto theft. The trial opened on March 16, 1987, in the Supreme Court of New South Wales before Mr. Justice Maxwell. It would run for 54 sitting days, becoming one of the most covered and emotionally charged trials in Australian history. Every day, the courtroom was packed with journalists, legal observers, and members of the public, while hundreds gathered outside the courthouse in Sydney. Under New South Wales law, if a group of individuals agrees to carry out an unlawful act, every member of that group is held criminally responsible for the actions committed by any member during the execution of that crime. Tedeschi demonstrated that all 5 men had actively participated in the abduction and sustained assault, sharing a common purpose from start to finish.
On June 10, 1987, after days of jury deliberation, the court delivered its verdict: unanimous guilty convictions for all 5 defendants on charges of murder and sexual assault. When it came time for sentencing, Justice Maxwell made judicial history. He sentenced each man to life imprisonment and took the extraordinary step of directing that their prison files be marked with the words, "never to be released." It was a clear declaration that none of the 5 men would ever set foot in free society again. The impact of the Anita Cobby trial resonated long after the courtroom doors closed. The sheer violence of the act ignited massive public protests across Sydney. Tens of thousands of people marched, calling for harsher penalties for violent offenders and demanding the reinstatement of the death penalty, which had been formally abolished in New South Wales for murder in 1985. While Parliament held firm against reintroducing capital punishment, the public outcry reshaped the nation's legal landscape. The case became the primary catalyst for passing strict truth in sentencing laws, drastically reducing executive discretion in parole decisions, and ensuring that life sentences for extreme violent crimes meant life behind bars. The tragedy also exposed glaring vulnerabilities in urban infrastructure and public safety for women. In the months following the trial,
Local councils and transit authorities conducted major audits across Western Sydney. Transport safety protocols were rewritten, late-night commuter security was increased, street lighting was upgraded around transit hubs, and emergency contact points were installed along major pedestrian corridors. Beyond legal and civic changes, the case redefined how society supports the survivors of violent crime. In the immediate aftermath of their daughter's death, Gary and Peggy Lynch made a conscious decision not to retreat into isolated grief. In 1990, alongside other grieving families, they co-founded the Grace Heaver Memorial Support Group, which soon grew into the Homicide Victims Support Group, HVSG, of New South Wales. The organization grew into a crucial support network, offering professional counseling, legal guidance, and peer support to thousands of families across Australia. In 2006, their vision culminated in the opening of the Anita Cobby Centre in Western Sydney, a dedicated facility offering long-term care and therapeutic support to individuals and families impacted by violent crime. Decades later, the Anita Cobby case remains a defining landmark in modern Australian history. It is remembered not for the senseless cruelty of the 5 men who committed it, but for the speed and skill of the investigation, the unyielding resolution of the justice system, and the enduring legacy of a family who turned unimaginable personal tragedy into lasting protection and support for others.